it was the discovery which ultimately meant that what happens, I mean, that language change affects phonemes. You know, it doesn't affect words, but it affects single phonemes. So, for example, there was Grimm's Law. Now, what does Grimm's Law say? Grimm's Law says that in voiceless stops are PTK. The feature stop goes to changes to its opposite, which is fricative. So P goes to F.
Did he describe it in terms of features or just?
Yeah, what were the,
Did
what
he
were the,
describe it in terms
no, what were
of
the actual
features?
words he was using when he talked about this?
I mean, did he say stop goes to fricative or P goes, or just list the cases?
Well, I mean, that would be one effect of that. If you can refer to features, you know, until in the beginning of the 19th century, features were not understood very well. But you know, by the end of by the beginning of the 20th century, people understood.
20th century.
Yeah.
So the restatement of Grimm's Law in terms of features was 20th century.
Yes. I mean, well, in fact, once you have the idea that phonemes are clusters of features, then changes in phonemes are
Changes.
change. I mean, you know, I should not tell you this. I mean, you know, I know that you know about
I
it.
don't know.
Well, I don't know. Who did that, though? Yeah, who came up with this? How did this?
I don't know. I mean, we came up with that.
Well, you know, in the early 20th century, when Grimm's Law was restated in terms of features.
Features, then, of
Was
course.
that pre-Roman?
No.
No.
No. Nobody.
So it's crop circle.
Nobody. Well, see, the idea that you should look at the grammar and at the statements in the grammar, that didn't come. I mean, you know, that came with you and with us. You know, you and
Well,
me.
yeah, but I mean, in terms of the features.
You know, they had it implicitly so, but they didn't understand
But
that.
it wasn't.
Roman was the first to think about in terms of features. I mean, even Trubetskoy doesn't have that, you know. And I think even Trubetskoy didn't have that.
Really?
Yeah.
And the principles of phonology.
Yeah.
Doesn't
No. I mean, there's some remarks that if you want to be very generous to him and interpret things, but basically he didn't understand. And it was only Roman who began to talk about features.
And this was still in the Prague Circle.
No.
Later.
It was when I was a
No, we
student.
came here.
Yeah.
So it's as late as the 1940s.
Yeah, and you were the idea that you had to have a description and that properties of the description mattered. That was an idea that
So it's as late as the 1940s.
we did. You know, that was the beginning of writing. I mean, when you and I met.
Where did Trubetskoy
And
fit into this? Where did Trubetskoy fit into this?
Well, first of all, Jakobson had, you know, Trubetskoy is of the most noble of Russian families. I mean, these are the people that married into the Tsar's family, you know. And Jakobson had sort of a little bit of a, you know, he was very inferior to Trubetskoy as a person. And so he always deferred to Trubetskoy. But basically, it was Jakobson's idea.
Really?
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. Because this should be looked at more carefully and established, but as far as I know, all these ideas came from Jakobson, especially when, you know, we got here and became very influenced by Noam into the idea that the forms of the statements in the grammar matter. you know, I don't think Jacobson ever understood the idea that the forms of the statements, you know, the formal statement was that having to say B goes to P. And
Well, when you were doing the sound pattern of Russian, were you discussing it with them?
yeah, I mean, and I had some features there, and that was
Did he-
because of your influence on me. I learned it from you. Yeah.
I learned it from you.
Well, okay, but you know, because we talked about it, you
No
know.
learned it from me.
So, but you know, that was when we, in the 1950s, 1960, when we came here. Yeah, and there's nothing before that in Jacobson.
It'd be interesting to reread Trubetskoy's.
So, for example, Grunstein.
I read it years ago, but I remember it as mainly kind of methods of analysis, kind of like Harris.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right. That's what he.
That's,
Yeah, and he was more influenced probably by what he understood Harris to say, misunderstood Harris to claim, you know.
Would Trubetskoy have known American structure?
Only to some extent, because you know, Trubetskoy died, I think, 1940 or maybe no, 38.
Did he know Bloomfield?
No, of course not.
But what was a guy like Humboldt do? You know, Wilhelm. Like he would do a
the-
grammar, but he had a grammar, right? So you would compile a grammar of what he did, Kavi, right? Wasn't that his language that he studied for, I don't know, what, 5 years? He studied this language and he compiled some huge grammar. Well, I mean, there was some description of the phonetics, right? I assume.
Well, but it was
How did they describe the phonetics? Given
they
that most
wrote
of the
letters.
Letters.
they were just okay. They were just transcribed using
transcribed letters.
existing
But the
orthography.
units weren't broken
And-
down into the.
Right, but then you had A.M. Bell, right? And he had a phonetic alphabet.
But that was much later.
Well, that was 1880s, right?
1880s.
Yeah.
No, but Bell was 1870. Yes, you're right. But that was that. But they were Grimm was before that. You know, Grimm was 1830 or even 18.
Right.
You know,
But when you compile the grammar of a language, it was not you would not the notion of a
Look,
phonetic alphabet that you would
look,
use.
the compiling of a grammar as a formal object. That was Noam's idea, and in linguistics it didn't exist until Noam came around.
These were basically lists.
Yeah,
Right.
You listed the sounds, you listed the morphemes,
that's all.
said a couple of
So,
sentences.
so even if
And
you
the
look
formal
at Bloomfield and
properties of
Harris,
these
what they did,
statements
they
were
just-
simply
So
not there.
Bloomfield and Harris were also just, it was also
Harris
this.
said Bloomfield is kind of a mixed story. You know, Bloomfield was schizophrenic. He, the work for which he's famous, the theoretical work, was super behaviorist, crazed behaviorist, misunderstood the logical positivists and that sort of thing. But on the other side of his brain, he was an Arabic scholar, and some of the work he did was modeled on Onany, which was generative.
And Panini.
Yeah,
Like the Menominee morphonemics
yeah.
is basically kind of generative morphology and phonology.
Right.
But he kept it secret.
Yeah, and nobody has still read. I mean, except for Noam and me, nobody's ever read it.
He published it in Prague, which nobody ever did, in the Travaux de Linguistique.
The linguistic society, which Noam's like Harris.
But that still does not use features though.
Where?
It does not use features in this sense.
I don't think. It's not a feature-based analysis.
No.
It's not.
I mean, the first time, you know, I think it's my work and your work,
It
and
came
our
together
joint
with-
work that we did when we first met.
Doris, tell me this, when I was studying with Bloch at Yale,
Yeah,
the big thing was that phonological analysis and morphological analysis had to be separate, and that you could not mix the levels. And you showed in your
that you had to mix them.
that you had to mix the levels.
Okay.
So the question that I wanted to ask is, where did this idea come from to begin with, that the levels couldn't be mixed?
No, that's,
I don't know
no,
that.
that's misunderstood logical positivism.
How so?
You have to be, everything has to be built up inductively from data. And you go step by step. First you establish the lowest level, then you put things together in the next higher level. But you can't go back because that wouldn't be an direct inductive procedure.
And when I came in, it was to question that axiom.
If you look at Harris, which did the limits, he recognized that it can't work. So when he gets things like, writer, which obviously have to mix levels, that he has all kind of analytic trickery to try to make it look as if you're not mixing levels. But look it up in methods sometime.
Yeah.
And when Noam came in the field, that was the first thing that was questioned. One of the first things that was
Question was the mixing of levels.
well, it was just obviously couldn't do anything. If you took it seriously, I mean, you could either not take it non-seriously, but you see, two things happened at that time, and thanks to Noam, is that he insisted that the statements of a grammar are objects of interest. They're not just statements like you and I make when we have discussion, and that you should look at them carefully and as formal objects. And once that, that proposition was accepted, a lot of things followed from that proposition. So you begin to ask,
Remember, when you studied with Bloch, you learned that there's a minimal contrast between pod, P-O-D,
Yes,
and
exactly.
P-A apostrophe D.
Yeah.
And that has to be a phonetic contrast.
Yes.
Because you're not allowed to introduce the fact that pod and
yeah,
pod do it,
okay, I mean,
So he
this is an
actually,
example.
he followed it to its logical conclusion,
did,
said there
yeah.
are two phonemes.
Yeah, there's a total absurd conclusion.
Which was
It's
absurd.
consistent. Yeah.
But
Yeah. But that's where we started. That's where modern phonology starts.
But prior to that, you had the ability that was conditioned on having the ability to describe that there were two different forms, right? So, for example, the notion of aspiration or something like that, right? I mean, so
aspiration is a feature.
it is a feature, but
if phonemes are clusters of features, then aspiration is a property of a phoneme.
But they weren't broken up
They were
in the
thought of
earlier.
that way.
If you look at the International Phonetic Alphabet, or any of the transcriptions that were done, there's just units,
Yes.
and you don't generalize over the units.
And there's a table underneath.
right, okay. I mean, but the table would appeal to the features, right?
Yes, but
If
you
you
point
look
that
at
out.
it
Exactly. Okay, that's the you got.
That this is important.
Right, right.
It's as if
You got
had Mendeleev, but without the,
The periodic table.
Yeah, I mean, not lined up in 8 columns.
And you don't say
Right,
that the lineup is for
Matters,
reasons.
yeah.
Right, I mean, so you don't establish
It's
any
there.
commonality
Yeah.
between xenon and
You don't
neon or
abstract
something,
out of
right?
it.
Or something.
You don't abstract out of it the reasons why it's this way and not some other way.
Yeah,
Exactly.
okay.
That's where we came in.
Okay.
That's really interesting. I mean, that all of these guys in the 19th century, so people like Maillet, de Saussure, and
Well, even everybody following them. Even Jacobson, until I used to yell at him. I used to go home to his house and yell at him.
it didn't help.
Well, immediately after it helped for 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, yeah. And even Jespersen.
Well, yes, I didn't know. He was much older.
He didn't do much phonology anyway. Mostly syntax. That good.
But I'm sure nobody else did either.
Well, but the whole philological tradition that I was educated in at Oxford, I mean, that whole philological tradition assumed that sounds were indivisible entities.
Yeah.
And in fact, when they wrote phonological
So
grammars like Campbell's,
you mean, but what do they mean by sound in this sense, Jay?
Well, just phonemes.
Just phonemes.
The elements of which the words were made
So those
up.
are the fundamental elements.
Those were the fundamental elements, and they were atoms. And in fact, when you look at the way in which a phonological grammar of Old English, I mean, these guys were very good at writing stuff. I mean, they really knew the facts. And Campbell, Alistair Campbell, wrote one of the best Old English grammar, phonological grammars, and the way he ordered it was alphabetical. I mean, first of all, you do the vowels, alphabetical, then you do the consonants, alphabetical, because there was no sense at all.
Yeah, and these are the ultimate elements of phonemes. And describe them as elements, and the alphabet was assumed to be.
It was the same with morphology. Like
Yeah.
the inflectional system. You just listed the form.
The
but the
nominative,
idea that you
genitive,
could have
and so
some
on.
general property.
Yeah, and that's it. You know?
So that so
I mean,
distinct
this
features
is,
really,
we started.
yeah.
We're still in this room.
In sound pattern,
What?
in sound pattern or in the Russian?
Well, I had it there.
I mean, in your Russian book, it was all features.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
where,
And
that
that's-
was my contribution.
That was 59.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what about the thing with Fonten and Jacobson?
Well,
Was
I
that-
mean, I just
That's a little
told
bit
them,
earlier.
and to the extent to which I could persuade them that this meant anything,
Was
it
there
got
anything else?
included there.
I don't remember anymore. That was 52 or so.
What?
That was about 1952.
52, 53.
Yeah,
Was there an analysis in terms of features there?
I don't remember now. I haven't
We can go.
looked
We
at
can go back.
that.
We can find that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then, the question, of course, arises: where did Jacobson come up with this idea? I mean, did it just spring out of his head?
Well,
Must have come from someplace.
I don't know.
Did
I
it
mean,
come from? Does it bear any relation? You know, he had this
Look,
regression theory. Remember, as you got
No,
about it, you got
no.
it doesn't come from that.
If it comes from anywhere, and I just have to read again, look in the books what actually was said, because I really don't remember now. But I mean, I think it basically comes from Noam. You know, all these.
Not the features.
Not the
Well, the
So I
features
remember
comes from me,
our
and
first-
I persuaded Noam.
Our first meeting
Huh?
at RLE,
Yeah.
we had a big argument about this. When you were telling me about features.
You actually argued? No, I didn't think
What?
that. You argue? I didn't know that you argued.
No, nobody argues with him.
Now, you know, that's 50 years or 60 years later.
But you mean when Morris presented you with the idea of features, you argued against it?
Yeah.
You thought that phonemes were,
Yeah, phonemes were the
Phonemes are
element, the ultimate elements. I mean, you
so
know,
what convinced you?
I mean, you know, we had
Somebody
examples,
arguing
and
against
I would
When we
come
were
and.
arguing, when I went home and thought about it.
It's no different from today. You go home and you say, you give an argument, and then you go home and think about it, and maybe.
You don't, you obviously you don't remember what arguments you used, do you?
No, of course not.
Yeah.
I mean, but you know, it's, and it had in the profession. There's still many people who haven't gotten this argument, or
Remember when we looked at the Sefer Yetzirah?
at what?
At the Sefer Yetzirah,
Yeah,
we found features there.
there are features in the Sefer. I didn't know.
In fact, we talked about it and we thought of introducing it into sound pattern, but decided it would be.
It was too complicated. That's all right.
This is the old Kabbalistic literature. Might be worth looking back at that.
That would sell a lot more books today.
Somewhere.
But how are the features attested?
I don't remember any, but things were, there was a suggestion there that they were picking out features in the way they described the, this is all kind of Kabbalistic mysticism, you know, so what was the meaning of,
I mean, it's yeah.
we did talk about putting something in it.
Yeah, but we decided it was bad enough what we were saying. Have to bring those guys in.